well-informed guest. Well, they all are, but this guy's got some inside knowledge, to put it mildly. We're joined by Gerald Butts, Vice Chairman at Eurasia Group and a former Principal Secretary to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Gerald, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Now, we want to hear about Eurasia's top global risks, and some of them are kind of alarming. We got to get your take on today's events. Did anything surprise you about the way Mr. Trudeau announced his departure?
No, by the way, Andy, it's good to be with you. Happy New Year to you and your viewers. I hope you had a restful Christmas. Not really. Nothing surprised me about the way the Prime Minister made his announcement today. I published a piece over Christmas where I speculated that not based on insider knowledge, but that his resignation was imminent. I think he did the responsible thing in giving the party a chance to choose a new leader and to give Canadians a choice in the next election.
It's going to take an awful long time with what you could call a lame duck prime minister, right through Parliament prorogued until March 24th. I mean, to me, 3 months almost, it seems a long time.
Well, if you look historically, it's not really that long of a time. I think Mr. Chrétien gave himself a year and a half from the time he announced his resignation until the time he left. It's a different political situation back then. The Liberals had a majority government, and there was a pretty clear successor waiting in the wings. But I think it's important that we do this all the time in Canada. We are a parliamentary democracy where the leader of the government is the leader of his or her political party, and that person often decides not to run again in an election. And this is the way we choose their successor.
Now, some viewers will get mad me asking you this, but he does get slammed for being supposedly anti-business. Do you think that's unfair, or could he have done more to stimulate economic growth in the country?
Well, I think, and maybe this gets into our top risks report, Andy, that it's a very different economic environment in 2025 than the one that produced the first Trudeau government when I was part of it in 2015. It was a much different economic strategy was called for at the time. And I think one of the great parts about living in a democracy is people are going to compete and contest for our hearts and minds over the next few months or a year or however long the process takes to produce an election, and we'll get to choose. I think it's always hard to change tack when you're in government, and there's a reason that most of our consequential prime ministers have had in and around 10 years on the job. And that was true of Mr. Chrétien, it was true of Mr. Mulroney, it was true of Mr. Harper, and it's true of Mr. Trudeau. And I think that there's a reason for that the clock does run out.
There is that decade-long clock. Top 10 risks for 2025, according to Eurasia. We don't have time to get into all of them. Yeah. But I like this, the G0 world, where really there's no clear global leadership.
Yeah, and that's a key point for most, especially your economically and commercially minded viewers, Andy, that we, especially in Canada, have benefited from a relatively stable U.S.-led multilateral rules-based global order. That's a mouthful. And around 15 years ago, my colleague and the founder of our firm, Ian Bremmer, I think very presciently said that world was ending, and we were going to end up in a G0 world, which is a take on no G7 that matters, no G20 that matters, but a world where even the United States, and this is the unique historical circumstance we find ourselves in, the United States built the rules of the road for post-war global order, and they are now the country that's leading its dismantling. So that's a pretty unique historical circumstance. We think at Eurasia Group that things have not been this geopolitically fragile since at least the 1930s, maybe even the 1890s. It's a very difficult time, and in particular for Canada, which has probably benefited more than any country by the U.S.-led global order. This is going to be stomach churning for whoever happens to be the next Prime Minister of Canada.
I guess critics of America would say that world order was designed to benefit the U.S., but we don't have time to go down that, because I want to get to your next one. This is a really interesting point. President-elect Trump, you argue, enters office far more prepared this time than in his previous presidency.
Yeah, well, I was talking to a former colleague of mine who worked for Chancellor Merkel, and we were reflecting how in the first time Trump got elected, everybody was worried that he didn't know what he was doing, and now everybody is worried that he does. And I think that that's a very different, and this is sort of one of the most important takeaways from our top risks report. Our economics team, especially at Eurasia Group, feels that the markets are underpricing the policy risks that Donald Trump is presenting, that he got elected, ironically, on an anti-inflation sentiment, but running on a platform that if you and I were in a first-year economics class and the assignment was design a platform to produce inflation, it would be tariffs, tight labor policies, which is a diplomatic way of putting his deportation policy, and an inevitable run-up in defense budgets. Those three things together are likely to produce inflation, and how he reacts to that inevitability is one of the top risks for 2025.
And just finally, I'm sorry, we're tight for time. We've only got a minute or two, but the world's two superpowers, US and China, and that rivalry could escalate, is likely to escalate.
Yeah, well, this is the year we see the U.S.-China relationship starting to really come to pieces and fall to pieces, and the consequences are going to be dire for everybody involved. We all have benefited from the economies of scale of having access to the Chinese market, and from a relatively placid relationship between the two largest economies and powers in the world. And we believe 2025 is when that really starts to end.
And we finally got, we'll have to leave it there, Gerald. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.